Okay, so I'm going back to that screen. Here we are. So we're discussing, this is the second shiur we're discussing this. And Avi, I don't think you were with us 2 weeks ago, but we actually asked people and people were happy to discuss this. So we can continue asking questions of that you raised with me about Emunah and faith in Hashem. Maybe we can go back to that later on. Right now we're going to do a series on these issues. 2 weeks ago we discussed the value of freedom. And I said that the concept of this chart is to look at a modern value and ask ourselves, does it truly have a basis in the Torah? If it doesn't, maybe we should just reject it. Just because it's a modern value doesn't mean it's right. If it does have a basis in the Torah, okay, so there's something positive here. Let's look for the positive application of this. At the other end of the chart, let's look at the negative application. What are the limits or things that balance it? And we spoke last week, 2 weeks ago, last shiur, we spoke about freedom. We spoke about every human being being created in the image of Hashem, Tselem Elohim. We spoke about Yetziat Mitzrayim as a story of freedom, the value of freedom. And we mentioned the positive application is freedom of man from any other man. No one in the world ever should be enslaved. Everyone should have their freedom and be able to make their decisions in their lives. There is no place zero place for slavery in the world. And the limits are, that doesn't mean that there's no one above me, meaning above men, above mankind. I am not free from God. I am not the sovereign. And we can find a few different negative applications of freedom. Freedom doesn't mean there are no limits. There are other values. Freedom has caused the value of freedom, the extremism, or what I call the megalomaniac freedom in the world today that sees it as the value and the only value. There are no other values. It doesn't need to be balanced or put together in some kind of complexity with other values. That creates a situation where you lose other values. And for instance, freedom causes you to lose commitment. And it's very detrimental, amongst other things, to marriage. People feeling that marriage is losing my freedom rather than deepening my relationships. So you can speak about deepening relationships through freedom, but you need commitment for that. And so sometimes the modern thinking, some people's modern thinking about freedom clashes with some parts of the Torah because there are other values, and the Torah has the value of freedom, but also other values. And it doesn't mean that we reject the value of freedom. It means that we put it in balance with some other values. That was 2 weeks ago. I don't want to repeat that. I'd like to discuss today one or two different values, but one of them is, and I'm not going to go through a whole list of values, but to do this 2 weeks ago and today again, so that can give us a sense of how to use this kind of tool, unless you want to raise maybe some other values to put on this list and to put in this chart and try and work on them together. But I think another one of the most powerful values in the world today is equality, everyone being equal. And let me guess that when we find places that equality clashes with the Torah, some of the people here have already mentioned it. I can think of a few things where the value of equality seems very strongly to clash with some things in the Torah. And rather than bring sources today, Dafka today, Ilana and Dan are encouraging me to go and find my English sources on Sefaria. Okay, I will try. But I didn't bring sources today. I wanted to leave it open for our discussion. Where does equality, the value of equality, clash with the Torah? Let's start with that one.
First of all, what are you talking about equality? You're talking about equal opportunity, equity. I mean, these terms have been, thrown around a lot. Which term is which? Do you mean people being exactly equal rights? What does equality mean?
Equal rights is one thing. Equal opportunity, certainly. Equal options of seeking certain, call it positions or roles that you can play in all kinds of different frameworks, including in society in general.
I'm
What do you
not a
mean?
political animal, Rabbi, but it seems to me some of these things sometimes work in opposite directions.
Such as?
Well, the classic thing I hear from conservative media a lot is like equal opportunity and equality can work in opposite directions. That people have equal opportunity to do something. They may not end up with having they may have the equal opportunity, but then they may not turn out to be exactly equal. Because we have a limitation. Some people are better at certain things than other things.
Very good, Michael. Thank you. Meaning that to try and give an example, if you try and teach all children the same, that may create a very strong lack of equality because some children need certain needs. I'm going to stop the screen sharing. If you want me to put it back on, I will. When you give all the children the same exact, you teach them all the same, some kids are getting what they need, some are not, some will have opportunities to grow through that, some will be lacking the very things that they need because they have strengths in different areas and so on. So making everyone the same, where you have to draw the line between equal, creating an environment that enables people to grow, each one to what they choose. Equality goes very much with freedom, but sometimes can clash with that as well. But you have to differentiate between that and communism, making everyone the same. I don't want a world where I am making everyone the same as everyone else. Yes, Tova.
Yes, and going back to Judaism, that was your question, is we have the Jubilee year, Shnat Yovel, where all land goes back to the previous owners. And I think that's a very important point because people have a chance to start again, to start over. So that's a social mean of getting the people to
have kind of equal financial opportunities.
Kind of
but at the same time, yes, Michael?
Kind of the great biblical reset.
Yes, right? But at the same time, in between those 50 years, the Torah is certainly not communist. The financial options are open. You can reach all kinds of different situations, and I would say that it's very interesting because it's saying that there's this is the way I perceive it. It kind of juggles two different values. It accepts that people can have what's the word? Initiative. They can have motivation, and they can have different interests in terms of if we look at the financial opportunities. But it's also a social responsibility to make sure that it doesn't become too extreme. So it's not equality, it's not making everyone equal financially, but making sure that we balance that with something that doesn't let it get out of hand. Right. It should not be, what's the term in English? In Hebrew, it's called capitalism chaziri.
That's funny.
Extreme capitalism that becomes ugly. Is there a term for that in English?
No.
Do you understand what it means? Capitalism chaziri?
Like a monopoly or something?
Sorry?
Like a monopoly?
It's more, it's a specific example. Capitalism chaziri means extreme capitalism where everyone has their own financial situation, and if somebody else is dying homeless on the street in 0 degree...
Doesn't matter.
In 0 degree, not Celsius, Fahrenheit weather in Texas on the beach, then we don't care. Meaning it's one thing to say people have opportunities to grow. It's another thing to say we don't care about those who didn't succeed. So again, it's a balance of two different values. Yes, Leslie.
Two cases in the Torah. There's strata of people with the Kohanim, the Levim, and then the Israelites. And I want to be a Kohen, but I can't be. And the second,
Leslie, on this one, I'm with you. I also want to be a Kohen, and they're not letting me in.
And in the secular world, if I have the ability, I can be a brain surgeon. In the Torah world, I'm nothing.
Why?
Because I'm a woman.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. There are women that were, like the rabbis speak. there were women that had important positions. No?
Very
So,
few.
Even in
okay,
primitive
Leslie.
times, there were women who dealt with real estate and were very, very involved in Memkar and commerce. I mean,
But Leslie, what do you mean? I mean, I agree with the reactions that it's hard for me to accept saying that because of what the Torah says makes women nothing, but I certainly agree that there is an aspect of lack of equality.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
one of the
you
things
agree
that I'm
with me?
thinking of is that when I was
Daniel.
studying Devorah, and she's a judge, and I
Right.
said to the rabbi that I was speaking with, well, she's on a par with the judges. Oh no, he said, you notice she's sitting outside under a tree, and she's got a court around her. And I thought, okay, that's it, finished. I'm not interested anymore.
Leslie, you have to. One of the important things that that one of the purposes of this kind of shiur is exactly to reach this statement. Sometimes you might have a difficulty with something in the Torah. That's very important to discuss. Sometimes what you have is a difficulty with a certain rabbi. It's not the same thing. Okay.
Wait.
Now, just to mention, Ilana, 1 second. I'm sure.
Torah is my thing,
Okay. I just want to say, you know what? Okay, Ilana. So you go first, and I'll add something about Dvorah.
Thank you. So wait, just so you understand.
Just so you understand, Dvorah is Ilana's haftarah from her bat mitzvah.
All those years ago. So, and that may explain a lot about me. But Leslie, on the other hand, Barak was not willing to go to war unless Dvorah went with him. He was a general, but he was not willing to go and fight unless Dvorah came with him. That's all I wanted to say.
Ilana, I think it's good we're recording this. We have proof in history that Ilana was on the side of not of criticism of what the Tanakh is saying about women, but protecting it. That's great.
Yeah, we also have the daughters of Tzlopchad on land.
Okay. So these are examples. These are examples that are very, very that give us an interesting matters, interesting material to work with. Because the question about Bnot Tzlopchad is, does it show that there are options? Does it show that the options are limited? Who makes the decisions? It's a very complex issue, but certainly, Leslie, what you said about Kohen, Levi, Israel, not everyone can be in every position. Not everything is open for everyone. And women certainly are restricted in certain areas. And that is absolutely an area that we have to look into. So equality of women is one area that we have to look into. Equality in public positions. Like I said, I'm with you. I wanted to be Kohen Gadol. They didn't even let me into to study, to go to school to be Kohen Gadol. They wouldn't let me.
So the Torah also.
My grandfather was a Levi. They didn't let me. My mother's father. So what can I do?
So the Torah also speaks against equal outcomes.
Sorry?
So the Torah also speaks against equal outcomes, that's not a reasonable expectation. Otherwise, why would we have to leave the corner of the fields and leave various things to take care of the poor and the widow? Right. They should have the same thing everybody else, according to current progressive guidelines.
I'm not sure I understand fully what you're saying. Are you saying that the halachot of tzedakah are limited? They don't demand that we give someone else the exact same thing that we have, meaning it doesn't have to be equal.
I'm saying that the current emphasis in the progressive world seems to be more on equity rather than equality, meaning that everybody should have the same outcome. And I mean, you can have that if everybody suffers the same equally. But I think the Torah is telling us, don't expect that. Some of you are going to be successful, some of you are not. That's just the way it's going to be. You do have a responsibility to help take care of those who are not, but it's silly to think that everybody's going to turn out the same.
Okay. I was about to take from your words the word responsibility. I thought you were saying something else, but it guided me in a certain direction. One responsibility is to see to it that people have basic needs. Okay, tzedakah does not mean we have to make someone equal to myself, it means that we have to see that people get basic needs at least, the very least. But you're saying I don't want a society. It's also a very financial and pragmatic question. Do I in modern economy? How much do I support people in need, or how much by doing that am I discouraging work and creativity and responsibility? Because if I give away too much too easily, instead of encouraging people to take responsibility and work, I'm allowing them to be lazy. On the other hand, I don't want people having less than their basic needs. So it's again a complex issue. And one of the values that we're noticing, and going back to our chart, something that equality needs to be balanced by, is every person has responsibilities. And if you don't try, and you want society to take care of your needs, and you don't want to try to do your best and provide for yourself in many different aspects of life, also financially, then that's not equality. It's detrimental to equality, because somebody else is going to work and you're just going to sit back and be lazy, and then he has to provide for you. So if you're an incapable person, if a person has mental issues or whatever it is, physical disabilities, whatever the reason is that a person can't provide for himself, that's one situation. But the value of independence and responsibility for myself as an individual and in society is a very important value. And so equality, I think Michael Cohen, what you said was right. It's just a big word. We have to break it down to small particles to see how we carry it out in a proper way. So thank you, Michael and Michael.
And we're not equal, but we still have equal value in what we said.
Okay. Okay. So what about Kohanim?
Yeah.
What about Kohanim? What about, for instance, one of the places where there's a lack of equality is within the Kohanim, is that very different to the world today. Disabled people, people with disabilities, people with certain kinds of deformities cannot be the representatives working as Kohanim in the Mikdash. Mm-hmm. And that goes very much against modern values, I would think. So maybe there's something to be said, and we have to get to women. I'm not going to overlook that one. Maybe for Kohanim and Leviim, maybe there is something to be said about something that God gives a certain mission to people. Maybe when we look at the issue of there's another lack of equality that we haven't raised yet, maybe that will help us afterwards to take a look back, reflect from that back on the issue of Kohanim. Then that raises another question of, is it possible within the Torah to say that a certain value has to be balanced in a different way? I don't think that it's possible to go against the Torah and say we ignore the role of Kohanim or Leviim in Beit HaMikdash, which is explicit in the Torah, but maybe we can enlarge the role of Israelites who are not Kohanim. And maybe we can structure things in a different way that makes it a little less, makes the gaps that it creates, the differences that it creates, less crucial, that they become more formal and less, create less lack of equality in practicality. And maybe there's a possibility of what we call in halacha a hora'at sha'ah. Is it a possibility for the rabbis to decide that for temporarily we will allow, in this day and age, we will allow people with deformities to be Kohanim who work in the Mikdash? We can't change the whole written Torah. As a temporary change, maybe we are allowed to do something like that. It's, I can raise it in the Sanhedrin. We need, or whatever, I can raise it in the rabbinic leadership. And I say it, when I say hora'at sha'ah, meaning something which is temporary, on the one hand, it might be a kind of loophole that halakha leaves for us to be able to make such decisions where they are needed. On the other hand, who knows, maybe 100 or 200 or 400 years from now, we are going to discover that we missed a certain value. It went unnoticed by us, that God tells us these are the people who are right for this role. Just like, we've discovered that the Kohanim do actually have DNA of Kohanim, right? You heard about that?
Rabbi Riskin.
Yeah. So maybe somewhere down the road, we will discover that their DNA is right for working in the Mikdash. I don't know. Right now, it doesn't seem reasonable, but maybe one day in the future we will, and maybe we don't want to throw that away so easily. So I'm saying let's be careful. Just like it goes with a different value, I would say. Just like we have the right to ask questions. If I was against asking questions on the Torah, this shiur wouldn't be happening. But just like we're allowed to ask questions on the Torah, I think we'll all agree you're allowed to ask questions about modern values, and you're allowed to look at them and check, question them. Give them time. We don't have to run quickly after every value and say everything has to change immediately according to that value. Let's assess it over a long period of time, and maybe we will discover that something within the oral Torah has to change in that sense, has to develop, and maybe we will understand them in the longer run.
But I think,
Hazel, did you want to say something?
can I say something?
Yes, please do.
I think that we are using notions and ideas from our time, and we're trying to impose them on earlier times. I don't know if it works. In other words, we have a totally different outlook of things now. We talk about the all kinds of notions that have that are from the 19th and 20th centuries, but we are looking and we are using tools from today to examine things then. But we have to look at then at the time of what was going on around Israel at that time. So maybe we will understand better the way Jewish law developed at that time.
Okay, so I will say two or three different comments. I will make 2 or 3 different comments in reaction to this. Number one is, it's very interesting. I would say, let's look at the issue of equality for women, of women's possibilities to reach all kinds of positions. For instance, to be a shofetet, like Dvorah.
Right.
And Ilana, what I wanted to say before is when Dvorah is the shofetet in the Tanakh and in the Talmud, a woman can't be the shofetet, so it creates a discussion in the Gemara. So how in the commentators on the Gemara, so how is it that the Tanakh says she's a shofetet and the Talmud says a woman can't be the shofetet? So
they were sexist.
What?
Never mind.
It has to do with the time, the way people.
They were sexist.
I'm sorry, Ilana, I didn't.
It's okay.
It's okay. So write it in the chat. Maybe then I'll be able to chap it. So I'm saying also Tova. I'm saying in the Gemara there are two, or in the commentators on the Gemara there are a few different opinions. One opinion is that she was not the formal judge.
Right.
She was the leading scholar. She was the leader, but formally she told the men how to make the judgment.
Right.
And that only shows you that sometimes the lack of equality is in a formality, and really she was the leader, but then why can't she be the leader in practicality? Another opinion is that when the people accept her as their judge, she can be the judge. In other words, if we come today, which leads to a different halachic option, I see the word now, okay. Okay. So the other answer that says that it's up to the people says that if we decide today that we want a woman to be our spiritual leader or our formal judge in halakha, in Beit Din, not in the secular judicial system, and if we take that upon ourselves, we can make that decision. And that's very interesting. And how far can that reach? This gets into details. One of the things that happens in these kinds of questions is there are 2 different kinds or 3 different kinds of situations that it creates. When you have a gap between what we think today and what we seem to find in the Torah. Sometimes we will discover that we misunderstood the Torah and really that gap is wrong. Sometimes we will discover that we're wrong. Maybe the modern value is wrong, and we have to accept that and understand it and learn to see where it's wrong. Maybe it needs to be balanced in a different way than is accepted in the world today, and that's another option. Sometimes we find that there is the gap, and the oral Torah works to minimize the gap, to close it, to make it smaller. It's not the most pleasant situation because it still means that we need to work on it. And why is there a gap between the written Torah and what we have today, which is another thing that needs to be discussed. If Torah is eternal, what does it mean that we have to close these gaps? And I would say about that the Torah includes different values, and the different values clash. They are both values of the Torah. Equality for women is a Torah value. It's not coming from the 20th century. It's coming from Hashem creating in Perek Aleph in Bereshit. And as you mentioned this once before when we discussed this issue, creating man and woman equally in Perek Aleph in Sefer Bereshit. And then when we find that there isn't equality, then we have a clash between different values in the Torah. So maybe the balance between them in different generations is expressed in different ways. But these are all options of how we deal with these differences between our world and the Torah. I would like to stress the following. If I asked you for names of leaders, figures of leadership in the Tanakh, if I ask you for names of men, I'm not going to do it right now, you will easily come up with 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever number we put together, we'll get to tens of names easily. If I ask you for names of women who were leaders, you will come up with a few individuals. If I ask you for figureheads, you might come up with the mothers, the matriarchs, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, but women who were leaders. So you have Dvorah,
Miriam,
that's right. But you have to look for the individuals, and it seems very unequal. But you also have to remember, and this connects to what you said before, Tova. You also have to remember where the world was at. The reality in the world was that women's possibilities were very, very socially, not just or unjust. Just this was the reality. Women's possibilities to advance, to reach certain positions and places of influence and leadership were very minimal. To my mind, it's fascinating that in spite of that reality, there are a few individual women who did reach that position. That's amazing. And that creates the opening that in the 21st century, it's possible much more than it was a few thousand years ago. And Dafka the Tanakh is showing us that option, is saying even then it was possible. So even more so, today it can become more possible, maybe even on a level of equality. I'll get back to the question of equality in our days in a moment. I just want to stress this before, Eliezer, I'll return to you in a second. I just want to stress this point that things that in the past happened not often, only a few times, there were only a few women in Tanakh who were leaders, but it shows you that it's possible. Rather than say it's not equal, it's saying it is possible. It was even possible then, it's certainly possible today. And still there's a gap in halakha, which we have to bridge, and that will be our responsibility in our time to bridge that gap. Eliezer.
Yeah, this is very complicated, so I hope I don't make a mess of it. But we've been discussing how sometimes the Torah speaks in the language of the time. I mean, the Torah, of course, is eternal, but it also speaks in terms of the way people could understand it at that time. And the question is, how far can one push that point? I mean, what are the limits of that point? Because if you talk about Kohanim, what do the Kohanim really do today, except bless the people, in public? I mean, do we really want to? I mean, do we really want to, I know you do, but do we really want to build a physical Beit Mikdash in which they appear? Or do we say, well, that was the way to be religious in the past, and today we want to follow the values that the Torah expresses, but in the way that things are done today, not in a libertarian way or something, in a real religious, humble way. But you see, I don't know if I can say it any better than that.
Okay, I will get back to that in a moment, please, Eliezer, about the Kohanim. I wanted to say one more thing about women, and it's the same notion that I'm saying. One second. One second.
What is that?
Okay. Okay. So I want to say that one of the basic things or the first thing that I put on my chart was the idea of let's look in the Torah to see, is this a Torah value? That doesn't mean that if I don't find it in the Torah, it's inevitably wrong. But it's very important for me to look and see, is it there in the Torah? And one of the things that you find in Sefer Bereshit, in Perek Gimel, in Perek Aleph, we found that man and woman are created equal. In Perek Bet not, and that creates a kind of complexity, which I'm not going, it's too complex for right now. It'll take us too intensely to a different aspect. But in Perek Gimel is the chapter where we find the sin of Adam and Eve and the serpent. And one of the punishments of Chava after the sin is the pasuk ve'elishech shukatech vehu yimshol bach. Translated, I didn't bring an English-speaking Tanakh into the office. Somebody's working there in the Beit Midrash in Matan, so I went into the office. But I don't have an English Tanakh with me, but help me along with the English here. Ve'elishech shukatech vehu yimshol bach. The man will rule over the woman, okay? When I brought that pasuk to 10th grade girls, I was, they threw all the rotten tomatoes and eggs that they had in their hands at me. And thank God they did not have any rotten tomatoes or eggs, but they did throw a lot of animosity at me when I quoted that pasuk. They didn't even know that the pasuk existed. And I learned to use it, and to take it as an opportunity to discuss with them, okay, how do you react when you see something in the Torah that gets you all fired up against it? And I said to them, look what the pasuk says. It's not a mitzvah. It's not one of the 613 mitzvot. No one in all of those rabbis who record the 613 mitzvot, not a one of them quoted this as a mitzvah, that it's a mitzvah for the man to rule over the world, over the woman. It's a curse. It's a punishment. It's something negative that happened in the world as a result of the sin. And it's up to us to correct it, to mend that break, that deterioration of the world. And Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says it. I have to say, I'm happy to say that I've thought this for decades, and I only discovered that Rav Hirsch says this maybe 5 or 8 years ago. And I'm saying this because I think it's pshat of the Torah. It's not just an interpretation that a certain rabbi said. It's fascinating that he said it 150 years ago. This is Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. This is not the end of the 20th or beginning of the 21st century. This is well in the middle of the 19th century. So it's fascinating that he saw it there already. But it's saying that, so it's important for me to mention this, to say, read the Torah carefully. Look at what the Torah is saying. The Torah itself is saying that there's something wrong here, but there are also halachot in the Torah that kind of set that wrong situation in stone. So the Torah itself is saying, the way I understand it, okay, there's something complex here. We have to work this out. And okay, have to work it out is one issue. Saying that the Torah is chauvinist or is against women is a totally different approach. To say that the Torah is saying something complex is very different. What's the end goal? Is the end goal inevitably total equality? Maybe it is. I don't know how long it will take to get there. I don't know what steps have to be taken to get there. Or is it possible that there is a reason that there will remain differences between men and women? I don't know. Am I allowed to say out loud that maybe, maybe we will discover that there is such a reason? Is there an intrinsic difference in the personalities, in the neshama, in the, are the differences between men and women, are they intrinsic or social, social influence? I don't think anyone in the world totally has a total answer to this question. I'm willing to face it, to ask it. I don't know. I don't know the answers to these questions. And one of the things I'd say about the process of the Torah, Eliezer, going back to what you mentioned, which I will get to in a second, is therefore, let's allow the process to grow properly. Don't push it too fast. Don't push it too slow. I know. If you take it too slow, people are getting frustrated and they disconnect. If you don't allow certain modern values to be ingrained within the way Torah is carried out in the world, then people get rejected and turned away, and you lose a lot more than you gain. On the other hand, if you run too fast forward, run forward too fast, you also lose. As my Rebbe, not my Rebbe, one of my Roshei Yeshiva, Rabbi Lichtenstein, said, you want to change all the planks of the boat, that's okay, just do it one at a time. If you change all the planks of the boat at the same time, the ship is going to sink. So don't change everything all at once. And he also said that, is it happening too fast or too slow? He said, it depends what you expect. If you think we should drive at 60 miles an hour and we're driving at 20 miles an hour, so it's too fast. If you think we should be going 100 miles an hour and we're only doing 60, so it's way too slow. Who's the objective person to say exactly, is it too fast or too slow? It's not a simple issue. I think we're not allowed to ignore it, and we're not allowed to change all the planks at once. And are we going too fast or too slow, or the exact pace? That's a tough one. And of course, the middle ground is where I am, right? Those on my left are going too fast. Those on my right are going too slow. I'm in the exactly right balanced position. I don't mean me, I mean every one of us in our different positions. But it's something that has to be handled on a nation level, not only on an individual level. And as you know, I think that we, Kino David, we participate in this process. Again, you could say we're going too fast or we're going too slow, but we do take part in the process of this issue. Before I go to relate to Eliezer's comment on Kohanim and the Mikdash, does anyone want to say anything further about equality of women? Okay, so I want to go back to the issue of the Mikdash, and you said something very interesting, Eliezer. First of all, do I want a Mikdash? More or less, no, more than I want a shul. I believe that we are human beings. We need frameworks. We are human beings. We are a soul in a body, and our religion needs to be a soul in physical, with a physical expression. And just like tefillah, what is tefillah if you just say the words and you don't have any spirit? But still, we need to say the words because we are physical beings. We need to have this expression in the world. We also need a mikdash, which is the central framework of a place for religious activity, for religious practice in Am Yisrael, which leaves open the question of korbanot, which is a whole other issue. I'm not getting into that one right now. It's a question. It's a good question, but I'm putting that aside right now. But certainly a mikdash. But you're right, Eliezer. It doesn't mean that the Kohanim have to have the exact same role in this mikdash as they had in the mikdash in the past, because that goes to the question of korbanot. And certainly we can make some changes there without going against the Torah. But I also want to address what you said, because I agree and disagree. Yes, what the Torah said in the past, as you said, on the one hand, it's eternal. On the other hand, it always relates to a certain time setting. in the past and in the present. And maybe some parts of the Torah related to certain aspects in the past. But again, I'm going back to not changing all the planks at once. We have to be very careful. What do we leave and say, okay, we don't have to continue that today because it's legitimate within the Torah for the rabbis to make a decision, like I said, about a hora'at sha'ah, a temporary decision. We have the physical ability to build a Beit HaMikdash, but we're not going to do it. It's a possible decision. It is a possible decision for the rabbis to make in a certain generation. I don't think it would be a wise decision. Personally, I don't think it would be a wise decision. But at the same time, just like in the past, maybe some things were in a certain time framework. That's true about the present as well. Meaning, just like we look back at the past and say we've made some progress. We are dynamic. We're not static. The world moves. We evolve. We grow. The world is growing, hopefully in a positive direction. We discussed that 2 weeks ago. Again, I asked the question, where are we going to be 400, 500 years from now? What are they going to say about us when they look back at us? So I would say we have to be careful in how we take these differences, although I'm willing to ask the questions. Yes, I am willing to ask the questions. I don't think it would be good to create a religion which is, it has to be in a kind of discussion, I would say, in communication with what it was in the past. It always has to have this communication and not lose touch with what it was in the past, because then it loses its framework. It becomes too abstract and won't have any presence in this world. So I'm saying something which is in between. It doesn't have to be, my aspiration to build Beit HaMikdash does not have to be, I want it to look exactly the way and function exactly the way it did a few thousand years ago. But it doesn't mean that I also don't want any role or anything similar to what happened a few thousand years ago. I think that finding the right balance and creating a continuity while evolving is also important. And I didn't really, this was not, Eliezer is a mathematician amongst other things. This was not a mathematical equation. This was not a mathematical, what's the word? I'm always looking for that word in English. Nuscha in Hebrew. It's not a nuscha matematit. It's not a, you're all muted. I muted you before when someone's...
Formula.
You always give me that word and I always forget it. I did not give a formula to the right balance, but I'm trying to give the notion of how we should look at it. Yes, Eliezer.
Yeah. I might have overstated the case, but in the Bible, in many of the passages that you've taught us in the last month or two, the Beit HaMikdash is not considered to be a granted thing. It's dependent on the behavior of the people.
Absolutely.
And one could say that perhaps, I don't know, perhaps if we behave in a certain way, it would be natural to rebuild a Beit HaMikdash. I mean, that's so I guess, I wouldn't, I wouldn't object to that. It's just that for that to be the objective would be a problem for me. The objective in terms of if things work out in that direction, but not to be forced.
I agree. I totally agree with that. To go back to what Yirmiyahu is criticizing, having a physical building and having corruption, there's no point. I totally agree. But I think, but my aspiration is to create a mikdash that will be, amongst other things, a center of opposing and struggling and fighting against corruption. That has to be one of the, it has to be morality. put it this way, equality, giving out a message, an energy of equality from that center of Beit HaMikdash has to be one of the main energies of what it's about. But that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be. It does mean that that's not the first thing on my list for tomorrow morning. But I do want to keep the continuity, so I do go to visit Har HaBayit because I want to keep that connection, that continuity, and
So
keep that aspiration alive.
Hopefully you want equality between vegetarians and meat eaters, because at the moment the korbanot are about 5-1 against you, aren't they?
5-1? Well, the issue of korbanot is an issue that has to be discussed. It's not
There
about
are
equality.
grain offerings.
I don't think there should be equality between human beings and animals, but I do think that we should act. I don't like to use the term, people say this, to act in a humane way towards animals. I don't think we should act in a humane way towards animals because they're not human beings. But I do think we shouldn't act in a cruel way. And I don't like eating animals. And therefore, I also don't like the idea of sacrificing animals. But it's a whole different realm that I can put on my list, but not. It's not about equality. So equality between meat eaters and vegetarians. Right now, it's freedom. You have your freedom of choice. One day, I'm going to convince all of you, and you'll still have your freedom of choice. So just make the right decision.
Rabbi, just first of all, just a quick one on the Beit HaMikdash. There's, as far as I can see, what's the point of a Beit HaMikdash? The whole point of the Beit HaMikdash was a place where we, in the physical world, were able to have almost a physical connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That was the whole point of the Beit HaMikdash, I would have thought. When the second temple was built, but we'd lost so much connection with God, or totally connection with God, more or less, it became like, it was like for us only, like a big Knesset. But the main point of the Beit HaMikdash was like a direct phone line to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that was the whole magic about it. So I would have said, the Beit HaMikdash should only come back if that or another sort of entity like HaKadosh Baruch Hu can communicate with us, that we can see his presence. And this shiur wouldn't be necessary because we'd see his miracles every single day. So that's, for me, that was just a quick one on the Beit HaMikdash I want to say. But about equality, I must say just a bit of a cynical note here. I don't think there is a perfect equality. I think there is justice and there is righteousness. And all I care about is when HaKadosh Baruch Hu may have put the Torah in place, and we as human beings have to work out with rachamim and with a brain what is fair and what is not fair. How do you treat a woman? It should be obvious that you treat a woman with the highest of respect. And there are places in the Torah where you get those sources from. I mean, men that don't give a get to a woman are disgraceful. And it doesn't take a brainstorm to understand. There are obvious cases where it's not that straightforward. But equality, the funny thing is, we've got some friends living in another part of the world, people we know, and in there, they live in a more liberal part of this world, and their equality, which they stand for and screech, and they'll stand on a box and they'll scream about it, is just okay as long as you agree with their point of view. As soon as you don't agree with their point of view, there's no equality. You're the one who's the racist. You're the one who's not liberal. You're the one who's not seeing their where have I. But actually, there's just the left, please forgive me for saying this, seem to have come almost as extreme as the right used to be. So the word equality, I think, has to be handled very, very cautiously. I don't think, personally, there was a book once written when I was younger, Men from Mars, Women from Venus, or the other way around. And I think everybody read the book in those days. And I think loads of people said, there is a very, very interesting point this person has made about the difference between women and men. But I think the agenda today has been to push every boundary that can be broken. And it's even been pushed to such extent that we don't even dare to speak up what we believe in anymore, because we're going to get rotten tomatoes and rotten eggs thrown at us. So I think, this is quite a bit of a contentious subject, I think.
Okay, let me relate first of all to your first comment, which wasn't the major one about Beit HaMikdash. Eliezer mentioned one aspect of that we've been studying in Yirmiyahu recently, and you're mentioning a different aspect. I agree with both. Beit HaMikdash is a place of connection with Hashem, and if it's not doing that, then certainly there's no purpose. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive to create it in the right way. If we create it in the wrong way and it's just an empty house, it's like a balloon without air. It's a house without spirit, without Hashem's presence. Then I agree. There's no point in it. But I do want to strive to have it in the proper way, with the belief that it can be a place for growth in connecting with Hashem. I have to say that the question is, what do you understand when you say that we won't have questions, Hashem will be revealed to us? Or you mentioned miracles. We see his miracles, we see his hand in the world. Do we see his hand in the world because his hand will be more physically obvious or clear in the world? Or will we see his hand in the world because our spiritual ability to see will grow? When we say V'techezena eineinu v'shuvcha leTzion berachamim, right? We say in the tefillah we want to see Hashem returning to Tzion. One level of understanding it, I think, is to say I hope to see with my physical eyes that Beit HaMikdash is rebuilt and Yerushalayim is a spiritual and moral center of the world, and so on. But another aspect of it is to mean, to have the kavanah, I pray that I should be able to have the sight ability to see spiritually Hashem in Tzion. Nothing physical has to change for that. I should be able to see it. Beit HaMikdash can be built, and some people see it and some people don't see it even then. So it has an external realm, and that has a spiritual internal realm. And I believe that we need both. So I strive for the external, and I think the internal is the main thing. But it's something that a balance or a combination that has to be created. Regarding equality, I think you're right. Equality is like we said at the beginning. Equality is kind of a headline, but what does it mean? What exactly is equality? We discussed at the beginning. Not everyone is the same, so we can't all be equal. Each one has different strengths and weaknesses. Maybe men and women are also different, and we don't want to be equal in that sense. But Venus and Mars, and I also never remember who's what. but I question. I ask the question of how much of a differences between men and women are intrinsic, how much are social influence, because I am sure that there are social influences, and I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure, I do think there are intrinsic differences. And I'm very curious, how do we find out what's what? And I don't want men and women to be the same, because I think it will be detrimental to romance and to the beauty of coming together and bringing different things together and creating this harmony. So I don't want that to happen. But let me give another example where I think women's equality is important, and when it's misused, and that's what my whole chart is about, when it's misused, it's detrimental. Women in a relationship, in a family, both parts of a couple should be equal. The world today is putting so much stress on equality that I totally believe in, that they are causing damage to the institution of family. The more conservative religious people who are more conservative than me, not conservative in the conservative movement meaning, conservative in meaning they are less liberal, less open to modern things and to change, more conservative than me, because they see that this creates difficulty for the structure of family. Because when there's, as they say, there are religious people who say, Yesh rosh echad lamishpacha. A family has one head, right? The one head is the man, okay, not the woman. Just like there's one head to the state. You don't have two prime ministers. We tried that in the last year. It's not working. You don't have two prime ministers. You have one. A family has one head. So it has to be the man. It can't be the woman. It can't be both of them. They can't be equal. It's damaging family. I disagree. A family can have two heads, and they have to learn how to work together and respect one another and make decisions together. That's what marriage is about. That's what it's about working together, not about having one head, about having two heads. That's what it's all about. But the world is creating, is not doing it right. On the one hand, there has to be equality. On the other hand, there has to be commitment. And adarabah, what's the good word in English for adarabah? It goes just the opposite. We have to educate today how to strengthen family from the perspective of equality. We have to prove, we have to show, we have to teach how to do it. I am actually working after this shiur. I'm going to make a phone call to someone because we're working together. He's going to write an article on family in call it modern Orthodox religious thinking. And one of the points is that holding women back is not what's going to create equality in family, is not what's going to strengthen family. It's going to cause damage to family, to the family framework, because women are going to want to move forward in all kinds of ways. And if you don't work out how the family structure works with that given that women are able to do all kinds of jobs and go all kinds of ways in their lives, then you won't make family work. We have to make family work with equality. And so I think this is one of the places where, like you said, Avi, where sometimes the modern world takes it to such an extreme that it's done in a wrong way. And then the religious people who are more conservative than me are afraid of it and reject the equality. And I think both sides are making a mistake. As I said before, I'm the middle ground, which means I'm always right. You know, I'm kidding. But I'm trying to say seriously, I think both sides are making a mistake, because equality, yes, is a value, and family is also a value. And let's make them work together and not have these clashes. That's just an example of where I think it can be done. I really believe it can be done. It's not being done well enough in the world today, and we have to learn how to do it better and teach how to do it better and give ourselves and our children and our grandchildren tools how to do this better. Otherwise, lo yeh tov. We really have to work at this. Yes, Tova.
Muted. You're muted.
Since Judaism is a legal system, right? It has a legal system. We have to make sure that all the changes, all the adaptations are done according to Jewish thought and to Jewish law. Which is very important. We cannot just say we are a democracy and we can do anything we want. No, it has to be done within Jewish law. That's how it's supposed to. What we are supposed. I think we are supposed to do. Otherwise, there'll be mayhem. There'll be hefkerut, and everybody will do whatever they want.
But I think sometimes it's very important for us to show that it can be done.
Exactly.
Meaning, and this is one example where I really believe it can be done. Yeah. And it's not a halachic question. There is no halacha that goes against the option of a couple deciding that the two of us are equal in the family structure. There's nothing in halacha that says that that's not possible. Maybe it's not what was in the past, but we can make it work within halachic framework and show that in this case there shouldn't be a clash of these values. By the way, going back to something else you said, Avi, about a man who refuses to give a woman a get and leaves her aguna, and that has nothing to do with with being modern or not modern. That's just that just has to do with being an evil person. But part of the challenge for halacha today is not to enable such a situation to exist. How do we work within halacha, like Tova said? How do we work within halacha so that these situations can be eliminated? And I firmly believe that the solutions exist within halacha, so that even where we have such an evil person, he won't be able to use this power against a woman. And that's an important thing for the Torah to be able to bring about in the world today. And again, I believe it's possible. It's a whole other topic to get into and discuss. Someone mentioned the word racism, and I thought we were going to go in that direction today, and we didn't. It's after 9 o'clock. We didn't go to racism today, but I think maybe we want to. I purposely left it open today. I didn't want to bring sources because I liked this open discussion and people being able to express their thoughts and enrich one another in this way. But maybe for 2 weeks from now, maybe we will discuss racism, because does Torah include racism or not? Is Torah totally in favor of equality between different nations and races and so on? Where are the questions about that issue? Like you said, Michael Kornman, you said at the beginning, you said something about the chosen people, right?
Yes.
How is that with racism? How do you is the value of opposing racism? Do you accept that today? Does that go well with the idea of the chosen people? I think we have a topic to continue the discussion tonight. I think we have a topic to discuss 2 weeks from now.
I would be happy to discuss that 2 weeks from now. I wanted to add one thing that occurred to me about the idea of equality in marriage and men and women. I think it's a mistake to use that term in a marriage. I think that it would be much healthier if we all admit that different people have different strengths and weaknesses, and some of those do tend to be kind of gender specific, although certainly not universal. But if we encourage people to develop their strengths and be proud of what they are, I think, equality isn't even in the equation. It's, I bring what I can bring to the relationship. My wife brings what she brings to the relationship. In some areas, she's way stronger than me. In some areas, I have my contributions to make. The whole is greater than the parts. I think it's a big negative to try to get two different people to feel that they must be equal, because all you're going to do is wind up with two unhappy people and a dysfunctional relationship. And we see that in society all over the place.
First question is, Etta, do you agree? You're on mute. You're muted.
I definitely have my strengths, which is why he's now a 7th degree black belt. He had to be. So.
Okay, we'll know what to watch out for.
Okay.
I'm just a black belt.
So seriously, I just think the word equality means different things, and it shouldn't be when we say equality. I agree with what you're saying, Michael. And that's also in a couple and also in society. We don't also have, if we're all the same, that's communism, and we lose all people's different talents and strengths.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be hierarchical. That's when I say equality, I mean, it shouldn't be a hierarchy. There's one head and one who's second place. In that sense, it should be with a lack of hierarchy between the two sides of the couple.
And the other issue,
it's not a competition. It's basically you want to create something strong together, and you're a team. It's not a competition.
Right.
And the other issue that we lost Rabbi Twersky recently, which made me very sad. But his big issue was always that the root of unhappiness is often a self-esteem problem. And when you convince half the population that they are not as good as the other half of the population simply because of gender roles, you immediately have a self-esteem issue. If, on the other hand, you take people and say, look at the wonderful attributes you have, let's build those, I think you build self-esteem and you make happier people that are more functional and more productive. Rabbi Twersky was brilliant.
Mm-hmm. And I would end with saying that a good couple is, like you said, the sum is more than the parts. It's more than, the sum total is more than putting the parts separately and having them, A plus B. It's more than that. It's the depth of the unison that's created by the different strengths that is a creation in itself, and it's also beautiful, and it's also the greatest strength. And like you said, it's like it's a team. It's not A or B. It's A and B as a team, and that's what gives it the beauty and the strength together.
Absolutely.
Okay, so try not to be racist for 2 weeks. And we'll discuss racism and being the chosen people in 2 weeks, Be'ezrat Hashem.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very good.
Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.
לילה טוב.
לילה טוב, thank you, תודה.
Bye-bye.
Busy.
Bye. Thank you.
Hang in there, Michael.
Oh, yes. Staying warm.
Stay home. Don't go to the beach.